Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Witte, still COVID-free, still here with Bob Schlehuber, getting into an hour of non-fungible tokens, digital currencies, how it is that elements of the American Rescue Plan are already themselves in need of rescue. We're going to get into Russia-gating the Grammys and way more. We're very excited to be joined by Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. Steve, thanks for joining us again.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me, guys. Gals.
What's up?
guys and gals and everybody else. Yeah. Steve, first of all, I'm sorry to do this to you. I myself had been avoiding this conversation because I used up all of my economic brain power during the GameStop saga, and I hadn't recharged enough for a new process to understand. But the news is a cruel mistress, and now I think I have to do battle with non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. I, of course, saw the story about the Beeple image selling for $69 million at auction last week, with honestly just sounds like an elaborate practical joke, like down to the amount of the sale. I still am like, really? Was that real, or is that just trolling? But we now have the Washington Post weighing in on the dark side of NFTs, and so I guess we have to understand them. So can you talk to us just about NFTs? What is this? What are they? What are, who's buying them? Who's using them?
In a world where you have video recorders and you have, cassette tapes going back further, and you have the ability to put things on a thumb drive and save them, the ability to have truly unique, one-of-a-kind things, it's kind of gotten lost. Mass production, et cetera. We are in a mass consumption society now, and they produce things in bulk, and the ability to find those rare things has been lost. So what does a Bitcoiner do in the midst of a lockdown? Well, they create NFTs and they create these unique images. And over the course of this pandemic, you've seen a lot of people really looking at crypto as, both a hobby and also as a means of trying to invest. Some people have a mistaken idea of what that even means, but we're going to leave them aside for a moment. So what an NFT is largely a one-of-a-kind digital token that ties to a part of the blockchain that allows people to have a certificate of authenticity that this thing, whatever this thing is, and it can be anything. That's the weird thing about this. It could be anything. It could be a piece of art, it could be anything. And what they do is they make it unique by providing the blockchain code on the back. It really, in and of itself, is not unique. It's just the fact that it is tied to this unique code within the blockchain. And so by doing this, it's yet again another way of playing games, and it's obviously taken off to great heights. Clearly kind of a crazy thing, but the more we digitize our society, the more these kinds of things are going to come up. I mean, you think about Digimon and Pokemon and all the other things that we had back in the day.
Yeah.
This is just, in my opinion, the next stage of that in digital format. And as crazy and kooky as it is, it's not something I would dive into. A lot of people are, and they're making a lot of money on it, and some are not making a lot of money.
Just to be really clear here, these, you're talking about a digital thing, like Kings of Leon released an album, I guess, as an NFT or something. Some NFT was in some way applied to this album.
The album cover, the artwork.
So, to be clear, this image that this person bought, this Beeple image, you have this blockchain code, so your particular thing can be tracked, but it can still be copied, right? It can still be copied. The image can still be copied. It's not an indicator or a safeguard of a level of quality or anything else. It's just that this particular image was altered in a way, and now the title of original or the title of unique and authentic has been applied to it, but it doesn't mean in any way that yours is the only thing that exists in the world of this thing in a particular quality or at a particular level of quality, right?
That's correct. In fact,
it's just a label.
Well, the uniqueness is really in the digits behind it in the blockchain, right? That's what's unique.
Right.
And so if I am somebody that's famous and I create something with my own thing, I can sell that And then as it's sold and sold and sold, I keep getting kickbacks from it. So there are uses for this. There are potential uses for this that would make really good sense in terms of creating, authentic art or authenticating, artists' work. So there is a side to this that, isn't like, oh my God, it's the worst thing ever. What is really problematic is the speculative nature of it. And that's the entire scheme of Bitcoin. That's the entire scheme of these digital currencies. In fact, is these one-off kind of get rich quick things. And somebody in the beginning makes out, and then the rest of the people continue to lose on it. And so it's a very speculative thing.
Well, I was going to say, like, blockchain, there's obviously useful applications of blockchain, right? In terms of like ownership, like transferring ownership and maintaining sort of chains of ownership, chains of possession and stuff like that. Like I'm not sort of bemused by blockchain, but just this, I don't know, let me go down the path of being really pessimistic for a minute, because there seems to be something really culturally sinister about trying to make something digital and original. And I understand that there are people out there making digital art who should get paid for their work, right? But you should get paid for their like design efforts or their creation, whatever. But, I don't know. I look at how we consume entertainment lately, and it's all streaming. And nobody owns any of these movies anymore. You just rent them. And the streaming platforms that we rent them from can and do alter them, right? So that you don't have any, like, it's slowly kind of erasing your link to anything that was actually an original vision, an original creation. And so taking something that can and is being endlessly duplicated and digitally sort of altering the sequence of digits behind one copy of it to make it special and valuable seems both farcical and dark. Like it's pushing us a step away from our actual concepts of what makes something valuable, which is usually, direct human labor or inspiration. And it feels a little bit like we are being deliberately divorced from this concept that it is worth it to have something that was handmade and not mass produced, that there are differences in quality than something that's being made by hand versus being made as cheaply as possible in a factory. And so I'm all for artists in all formats being paid for their work and having a way to sort of follow these payments and follow these authenticities and trace something back to its originator. The sort of way that this is being used and talked about feels like a way to kind of sneak most of us further away from what is actually valuable into this world where everything's a copy. Nothing has an existence that nothing like can't be changed. You know what I mean? Like you can't grasp onto anything, and you just sort of live in a world where there's fabricated, reproduced copies of things constantly streaming before you, and nothing actually has any quality anymore.
I genuinely do not disagree with you in the least. What my concern here is that ultimately, what is worth? What is value? What is valuable? Right? What is valuable is whatever someone's willing to pay for it, right? And that's the capitalist nature of our society. And this is why when you're rich or when you want something unique, and I'm not advocating for this. Believe me, when I say this, I am the complete opposite side of advocating for this. I'm just explaining it. I really do think that there's a certain type of person out there that is drawn to this. It's in their DNA to be drawn to this kind of stuff. When you're rich, you think about the movie Hostel. It's kind of a gross movie, but you think about it. When you're rich, what do you do when you have everything? Well, you got to have something that's unique. And so these people would buy the person that they could kill or torment or whatever. And that's just yet again another form. Would you call that valuable? I would be disgusted. I would never even think of it. But then again, this is what this community does. They go out and they do these things. So I think that what you're seeing is just one more expression of a new technology. Go back to 2000 when Y2K happened and you had the internet starting to really come about. You had a million .coms show up out of nowhere, a bazillion ISPs show up out of nowhere. All these strange business models come out of nowhere. And little by little, as the insanity of that new technology, that new thing came around and it became normal, all the weird stuff kind of faded away and the stuff that had staying power stuck. And I think you're going to see something like this as well. But this is the nature of a Bitcoiner's mindset, right? These are the things that, I mean, these are the people that play Second Life and do push-ups in a jail cell. And, they skip dinner with their kids because they're busy doing push-ups in a virtual jail cell with their icon. So it's not unheard of to live in this fake world. And a lot of people are doing it because the real world, unfortunately, pretty bad.
No, I agree. And I'm not trying to be a Luddite here or like say new technology is bad. It just is unnerving that this is happening, this sort of weird application of huge amounts of value to reproducible things is sort of happening at the same time as, it becomes harder and harder for everyday people to have anything at all that wasn't, mass produced by slaves somewhere. And it feels like they're trying to kind of slowly pull the wool over our eyes and make us believe that like there actually isn't anything else out there, right? There isn't anything that's handmade. There isn't anything that you can see the brush strokes on,
That is correct. You're spot on. And this is the flip side to that, is that we have lost the ability to do things with our hands. We have lost the ability to be artisans. We've lost the ability or the vision of what it means to truly be a maker. And in this new digital world, there's a video game that my kids play called Abzu, and it's a scuba diving game. Okay. And you watch it and it's like, what is the point of this game? It's really beautiful and the sounds are amazing and you want to fall asleep and relax to it. It is absolutely a spectacular visual thing. And what it is it's digital art. That's all it is a digital experience. It's not really it is a little bit of a game, but it's really more of an exploration into the beautiful art that these coders did. And so I see that as kind of a similar thing here. So digital art is real, the art of doing this. So the question becomes, at what point in time do we want to crack down on this so that it's not just literally stealing from people? I mean, to me, this is like selling vapor. There should be some sort of regulation, but that's the point of these things. There's very little regulation. It is the wild, wild west. And I think as people start losing big on this stuff, there's going to be pressure put on our political space to start regulating it and start bringing some normalcy to it. But right now, they don't have laws. Laws aren't keeping up with technology. And so you're watching these things explode in front of you, and there's no legal structure really by which to manage it. There's nothing. So I think, think about this. How many Congress critters actually understand banking, for example? Very few of them. Even less of them understand the nature of this digital world. And so they're being tasked to write laws to regulate this stuff, which then, of course, puts them back to Silicon Valley to ask them for insights. And then Silicon Valley and these other tech entrepreneurs have a vested interest to paint regulation in such a way that allows them to continue behaving in such a way that they can grow this thing. So this is kind of the issue that I think we're facing, is an untested, unknown digital universe that has people that are inept to manage and regulate it. And we're sitting here watching it happen in front of us. And it really is scary because you don't know where it's going to end up going.
Steve Bannon, to your point, Steve, was talking about this in American Dharma, the movie that kind of just interviews him. And he's talking about that exact scenario. These people like missing dinner with their kids, not necessarily having a lot of friends, but in a digital world, thousands of friends, maybe the most popular person there. And he really tapped into the psyche of people that have kind of abandoned living in the day-to-day reality world because it is so dismal and it is so hopeless in many ways. And he said, look, I can see these people experiencing what they're doing in the virtual world. Let me take advantage of that and shape how these people then act in the political world because there's a lot to be done there. And I just think it makes it even more dangerous if we don't find regulation, if we don't find understanding, if we don't find some restraint, or those of us on the left at least combat that. So people like Steve Bannon's of the world, Michelle, don't take advantage to turn it towards nefarious ends.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, we're in agreement here. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? Is that, and I think this comes back to, I'm watching folks like Rohan Gray from the Modern Money Network and Brett Scott, who is a genius that's in the space. And they're talking about the digital commons, and they're trying to understand how to, what should be within the digital space of the public sector, which should be owned by all. versus what should be speculative and so forth, and the rules around that. And there is a tremendous amount of pushback because the hatred for the establishment, the hatred for our government, with many is very real. The lack of trust and the desire to quote unquote be free of any kind of oversight has percolated to such a point around the world that, people like those guys that I mentioned are out there fighting tooth and nail to build regulatory environments that allow, the public commons to take over, so that we aren't dealing in this weird, bizarro, valueless speculators world. That this casino that is literally going to be creating people millionaires overnight and destitution the next day. So it's a pretty frightening area. I think you're right to be afraid of it, and it is dark. There is a very dark underbelly to it. So yeah.
Yeah, it just feels like, I don't know, the mass production of everything has got to have a downside. Steve, we talk to a lot of crypto evangelists here, and I want to move on and talk a little bit about, Rachel Maddow and her Grammy and the American Rescue Plan, but I wanted to give you a minute if you want to be a little bit of a crypto critic and tell us some of the other side of this transaction. And is there something to be wary of when you talk about paying $69 million worth of the cryptocurrency Ether for something? Like, all of this seems totally imaginary.
It absolutely is. But, in fairness, I mean, how many times have you seen wallets just vanish? There's been times where servers have crashed. I mean, people lose millions upon millions of techno bucks, whatever they're called, Ethereum, Bitcoin, you name it. And I think that there's a huge issue there because these things exist outside of the normal monetary environment. But in order to really be acted upon, they typically transition from whatever state they're in into the unit of account for the common currency of the nation, whatever nation you're in. So you always see people say, I've got 500 billion in US dollars of Bitcoin or whatever. They don't have 500 billion of Bitcoin. They have $500 of Bitcoin. It's measured still in dollars. And so what happens when they force redeem their Bitcoin? Where does that US dollar come from to fulfill their request to redeem that money? Where does that money get backstopped from? Mm-hmm. These are real serious questions that I think need to be addressed, need to be considered. And I think that, honestly, that when you look at the point of our state, I mean, I think it's very important not to make crypto anything more than what it is. It's a speculator's game. And quite frankly, it's really horrific for the environment. So I'd like to see crypto in general captured back by the federal government, by the nation's government, and basically just turned into a common good instead of a speculative tool. I think these speculations are the real tragedy behind all this.
Yeah, and the energy use in crypto mining. I mean, it's fun, they've gamified everything. So it's fun to swipe around and buy your coins and laugh at, all the different weird names and watch your dollars go up and down a little bit. But yeah, there are actual consequences in terms of just, computers sucking up energy to do all this mining for, again, something that what even is it all? All right, let's speaking of other culturally sinister events, we had Rachel Maddow winning a Grammy a couple days ago, which I totally missed, but she got it for the audio version of her book Blowout, which is about how the fossil fuel industry influences and corrupts governments and international relations, which, sounds great, except that, what do you know? Turns out rogue state Russia is the greatest fossil fuel villain and probably corrupting U.S. democracy, which I'm guessing was just fine before all that and not, in the pocket of the industry itself. And I'm not going to pretend I've read the book, so I'm not going to do a detailed critique of it. I saw a review in the Daily Hampshire Gazette that sounds pretty grim. I guess Rex Tillerson comes up and gets a mention for calling Trump a moron as he exited his position of Secretary of State. And the criticism she offers of Tillerson is that he was too happy to do business with any country, including Russia, as long as they had strong contract laws. I didn't see any mention of the whole issue of having an oil and gas CEO as Secretary of State in the first place, right? Which is if you can't see past the water that you are swimming in. How can you possibly comment, intelligently on anything else? And so the fact that this book is getting a Grammy definitely makes it seem like Russiagate isn't going away, but is maybe making a transition into entertainment. And I wanted to kind of ask you, Steve, like, obviously politics and entertainment have always been mixed, but I don't know that politics as entertainment has ever been as prevalent as it has been lately. And I wonder if part of that is really people feeling like they don't have any chance to really influence politics. So you might as well just watch it as a soap opera. And now you kind of perhaps have a sort of reinforcing cycle where you have people who are supposed to be governing us more and more engaging in these kind of theatrics. And it's just sort of reinforcing a distance now between so we're not participants in politics as much as we used to be as spectators. And I wonder what you think about that, Steve.
Great speech there, because this is a part of a bigger problem, in my opinion. Okay. So the idea of libertarians in general and this right-wing fascist state that we're in are really to make the government seem as ineffective and incompetent as possible. And so many people have seen through the political theater. You saw a huge movement with Bernie Sanders, and each time, somehow or another, a toad living under a toadstool ends up being the nominee. He has the movement, he has the people in the streets, and then right before your eyes, that defies all logic, they pull up a corpse and a cop to be the president and vice president. And that right there is like, how did this even happen? Okay. So people have lost the belief in the government to be an effective tool for advocating for them or for being a meaningful change agent in society. And so these things, they've always seen it a bit like political theater, because you see them in the Congress fighting with each other on the stage and then down on K Street having a steak together. And so the idea of political theater has always been there. But now you're starting to see the media, which had always been at least partially critical, at least sort of believable, give up that role. The investigative journalists have been run out of the business. You see alternative media being strangled and choked out. So the only thing you have left is infotainment. And quite frankly, most people are so harried that if you go into something at any length of depth, you can tell that their eyes are rolling back in their head. They want quick, fast food bites of information. They don't want explanations. They want to be entertained. You almost see Gladiator. Are you not entertained?
Yeah.
And that is what I think you've got here, because otherwise people, number one, they don't believe the news anymore. Number two, they don't believe government is effective. Unfortunately, it could be, but it's not right now. It's captured. And so this is the next phase of this, fake world, this Truman Show that we're living in. This is it. And that's the next step. Yeah. So there you have it.
Yeah. And Maddow's still on it. I'm going to play a clip from her last night suggesting that Russia was part of the reason the Trump administration bungled COVID so badly. So let's hear Rachel Maddow tell it.
One of the things we learned just this week from the intelligence director is that part of the disastrous Trump COVID response is that Trump put in a key COVID response role one of the people who helped Russian intelligence with its 2020 election attack. I mean, how do you even begin to unravel that? How do you even begin to get accountability for that? And when does the Justice Department start knocking on people's doors about this stuff?
I mean, one, you had the Justice Department knocking on people's doors for years. With the Mueller report, we already know what that found, which really was not very much. Rachel Maddow here is talking about Michael Caputo, who helped put together an ERA program about Joe Biden and the previous administration's role in Ukraine that was not flattering, obviously, to Biden. And that was sort of obliquely mentioned in the DNI report we've been talking about, although, again, it wasn't mentioned by name. And it seems pretty obvious they were talking about this documentary. People are assuming it. And this guy Caputo was in contact with other people who are sort of tagged vaguely in a variety of different ways as Russian influence agents, right? And so Caputo was put in as HHS spokesperson. And we all remember how the Trump administration was changing data pathways and changing reporting practices at the CDC, which we talked about at the time, which seemed very unhelpful and very dishonest. But Trump And the Trump administration didn't need Russia to screw up the COVID response, right? We had the governors of Florida, North Carolina, Indiana, Arizona, South Dakota. They didn't need Russian operatives to tell them to hide data, to protect key industries, and to do exactly the same thing on a state level, ensuring that more people died in this pandemic than absolutely had to. And so also, Steve, I mean, one, I don't know what she wants the Justice Department to do anymore. But two, when you look at what's happened over the course of this past year, and you look at the billionaires of this country increasing their wealth tremendously, I mean, I believe at record levels, you look at Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk in particular, I don't even know if it's fair to describe our COVID response as bungled, right? I think Trump bungled it for himself in that he didn't get reelected. But, you know, in the sense that it doesn't seem like anybody, quote unquote, important suffered. And so I wonder if pretty soon we're going to stop saying like it was a mistake, mistakes were made, and start understanding that actually probably a lot of people would count this as a success.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. And so, you know, we've talked about our podcast, New Untouchables, before.
Yes.
And the New Untouchables points out the systemic, deep corruption that has, you know, been in our government and our, you know, our society now for forever, quite frankly. And what I think has unfortunately happened here is that these types of things, if you will, everybody knows something's wrong. You just said, I know something's wrong. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was by design. You know, maybe Trump bungled it for his own election, but maybe this was all by design, you know? And so everybody kind of understands something's wrong, but no one really understands the deep financialization that's backstopping all of this. You know, this is basically a criminal enterprise that is backing it up. But we have bought into the propaganda of the Rachel Maddows and others with Russiagate and on and on and on, because that's what is pumped into the households of 350 million Americans every single day. And so the schadenfreude, the lies that the media tells, hide the fact that over this whole period of time, the real mechanisms of what we hang our hat on, when we talk about MMT and all this other stuff, they're not disconnected. I know it seems a little dispersed, but it's not. The idea that we can create money to spend on regular people is always so much of an eye-opener. Like, what? What are you talking about? But then when you see these billionaires make billions and billions when the economy is coming to a crawl, when people are out of work, et cetera, it should become relatively easy to understand that something, in fact, is very, very wrong. And quite frankly, it is designed to work this way. This is exactly the way the power brokers that are in charge of every one of these agencies, and it's verifiable. And that's what the New Untouchable shows. We have those Justice Department people you were talking about. They try to go after these bad, you know, the bad guys, and they are literally cut off. Obama and Holder literally blocked prosecutions. They literally stood in the way of prosecution. This is all part of the business model. And the problem is that they've gotten to the point where it's so obvious to some people that are able to see this stuff. Okay. They don't know the mechanisms. They don't know the guts, but they understand fundamentally something is terribly wrong with this picture. So I think that it's important to start diving in just a little bit deeper and start realizing that what they've done is they've literally eliminated the auditors, the people that oversee these things, all this stuff. They've cut it down, the oversight, to barely a veneer, just a slightest veneer. There's nowhere near enough people in there that are actually not part of their the control factor, that are part of the industry, that just get rolled into these jobs. And yet it is so complex that if they are not the ones doing it, the other people, just like I said about Congress, it's too complicated for them to meaningfully audit them. So you've got a very, very challenging scenario there. And yes, it is very, very perverse.
And it is so important. I'm glad you brought up the New Untouchables. I was going to ask you about it. I will ask you about it before we let you go. But it is so important to start getting into some of these mechanisms, right? I think, you know, it's as you say, it is clear. It's clear walking around that if over and over, what happens after a disaster is that the same people get richer and the same people get poorer. Once it happens 2-3 times, it's not a mistake, right? And so now, it behooves us to understand the processes through which this happens, which I know that you are exploring and other people are trying to explore, because it is complicated and it is a lot to expect your average person to get into while sort of parsing through the vague clues you can get from mainstream media, which of course is ignoring this. And I know we got to let you go, Steve, but I just wanted to ask, you mentioned how the overseers and the auditors, part of these mechanisms are stripping away any of this oversight when it comes to resources that are going to the 1%, right? But when it comes to money that's going to poor people, there's the will might be there. You might have the policy written down on paper, but somehow there's never the administrative capacity to get it out there. And so I wanted to just ask you very quickly, with the child tax credit provision in the American Rescue Plan that Biden's getting so much credit for slashing child poverty with. Even before it was signed, he was like, he had already halved child poverty in the United States, according to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Well, now it turns out the IRS is saying, we might not have the personnel to do this. I know the deadline is July 1st. We might not be able to handle it. We have this huge backlog of tax returns. And so I just wanted to ask you to comment on, I think, a motif of this pandemic, which has been, I think it's a corollary of the medium is the message, which is, the administration is the policy. You say you're going to, give this this expanded child tax credit. It's going to do so much to end child poverty. But if you don't actually have the people you need to get it out there, how committed are you to doing this, right? How important is it?
I couldn't agree more. I think that, the average person doesn't think about staffing of these key agencies. They don't think about the staffing of these key auditors. They just want small, lean government. They would rather it be a computer program than actual people. And so the idea of actually staffing this stuff is like a black eye. It's the boogeyman, so to speak. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that this is a feature, not a bug. This is the way it's designed purposely. And because the more you believe that you didn't get your check, the government failed you again, it didn't do what you said it was going to do in time, government always fails. This is part of a bigger, more insidious thing going back to the 60s and the Milton Friedmans of the world and that whole Chicago school and the Mont Pelerin Society and so forth. This has been a very, very organized, and it's not like some conspiracy. It's very easy to see. This has been the Koch brothers' plan to shrink government. It's been there forever. And the more you get failed by government, the less you want it. So mission accomplished, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's such a good point. Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressive and Real Progress in Action. We got to let you go, but tell our listeners where they can find Macro and Cheese and the New Untouchables.
Absolutely. Please come to our website. It's realprogressives.org. Go under our media drop down and you will see the New Untouchables, and you will also see Macro and Cheese. And we are on all the major podcasting platforms. Please do come see it, because we are absolutely committed to getting this information out there. This is not infotainment. This is weaponizing knowledge for one mind at a time. So thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Bob, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Great to talk to you, Steve. Have a great weekend. Of course, you're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're live in DC, and we'll be back right after this.